Loft Literary Center. He lives in St. Paul, Michael Moos.
It is far away. Thank you so much, Richard, for inviting me to read tonight. And I just have to say, it's a pleasure to help all of us celebrate the publication of your wonderful new book.
Oh, thank you.
Essentially. I'm so jealous of that title. And thanks to all of you, for coming out tonight to hear us read. Piano and saxophone, it's hard to follow. I'm going to read a few poems to begin with from my book, The Idea of the Garden. The thing you fear. When the thing you fear comes and nothing happens, nothing changes. Dry grasses are still standing, dancing in the cold wind after the rages of deep winter, pass without clemency, now with no purpose, no reason you can see. A great blue heron rises off the river, his long wingtips scraping the water, making his way into a sky more compelling than stalking the sunlit shadows, for something shiny, flashing fast, something vanishing into the clear current without impression. Suppose you are not the only one with a soul. Suppose the crows will be the last ones at the end of the day, waiting for you to give up, holding back nothing in your empty arms. Not judgment, not even hope, with its persistent litanies. Leave behind the burned places in the meadow, an attachment you cannot explain. Like a culmination of desires, shed the translucent cast-off skin of a snake, the snake now coiled somewhere else in newness. A course your life might take. There doesn't always seem to be any clear beginning. You wait for the moon's fullness, for the wind's light touch, maybe, or a familiar song just out of reach in the mind. A fox sparrow appears one day with a cold wind, scratching for seeds in the hard dirt below our mulberry tree, until the night he rises into a clear sky, pursuing something he remembers. Bright starlight traced inside the brain, translated not just with the mind, with the silent rush of his wings, the voices of rivers and dark roads flowing beneath him. He has somewhere else he needs to go, or wants to. There are different kinds of freedom. What if you had fewer choices? Only bread, raw honey, tea. The incandescence of your hunger, worth the pain, the price of human love. Good, because it lasts only a little while. Or good, if it only lasts a little while. Would inner freedom have more power? The sparrow, having only a handful of dark seeds, a small piece of bread fallen from a hand, wind rising suddenly in the bare trees, and the great spring migration beginning again, never the same. The bird voices beginning to draw something nearly numinous out of you. You want to grow wings, to rise out of your winter body, like a lover, briefly touching the beloved shoulder in passing. I'm in love with how the ancient myths are still at work in our lives. This poem is called Two Herons. First close over the dark water, then rising into the late afternoon sun. Two great blue herons appear. One breaks away where the two channels flow into each other. In the dusk gathering before night and the sudden stars, separated from each other, sometimes you almost imagine the other's heart beating. Could a shadow recognize the other shadow of its mate? Would it be good enough just to travel together, learning the hidden currents, the placement of fallen trees, standing still in the clear shallows? Does the soul miss the body? Or does it only want more light? And the weight of a solitary form held up by the wind. Sometimes there is the feeling of someone walking at my side. When I look, there is only a slight movement, like a breath in the long grass, sighing, then still. O Eurydice, I'm going to switch and read a few short poems from another book manuscript titled In the Range of the Western Meadowlark. Some of these poems were written in a time of loss and healing, something I trust all of us in our own ways can understand and share with each other. Spine of a buffalo calf. It did not take long for the ashes to leave your bare hand, not long to settle into the grass. You told yourself the dead are to be left behind in the drifting snow, or among the spring wildflowers opening their blue bodies. In this, you were telling a truth, though not all of it. So you will come back to look out over the ridge, out over the dark vertebrae of an aging continent, to feel you have fulfilled your ancestral promise, made amends in the sunlight. You lie down on the dry, hard earth, emptiness filling your rib cage, your eyes full of the featureless sky, and one dark bird circling away to a tiny speck. You know a fleeting pity for the delicate wildflowers crushed under your weight. As you lie there seeking concord at the edge of the draw, searching this dry edge of the Badlands for a sign, listening to the silence on the far shore of your prayer, full of all the nothing in the world, you bend down this morning in tall winter grass, the sage, dusty, dry blue, faded sculpture of bright rose hips in the wind. Here, discover the bleached spine with its white ribs, the abandoned skull now poised between the great rocks as though sleeping, as though waiting, to slip back. Waiting for something to come after the coyotes, the vultures, the gnawing fingers of sunlight returning to make a solemn gesture across the land. The old infinities are still here, of course, but not quite as you imagined them, as though sorrow is a bird you could name, but only in a language from another age. Where the blue iris dances. The white prickly poppies haven't opened up yet. The silence of the nameless road beneath you touches the silence of the antelope lying on the hillside, like a promise waiting to be kept. Ponderosa pine are lying down near the dry creek bed, the wind singing through their declining branches. There is time enough to stop here a while, thinking about the field the soft gray ashes made, leaving your bare hand after the rain passed. Maybe there is a place on the earth you can find where the wild blue iris dances without needing paradise, that opening between worlds, where you could step through and not die. Maybe there is a place in the mind you can go, a ridgeline, a secret cave filled with peaceful echoes, clear water rushing over stones, and a gate still creaking in the wind, circuitries and fault lines of a soul you do not listen to until you have lost enough. Probably it is not forgiveness of others so much as forgiveness of yourself. Someone, you don't know who, will open a hand one day, giving your ashes to the wind. I'll close with this newest poem in the book. Questions for the Mountain Bluebird. You might ask the mountain bluebird what is the secret of his happiness. Ask how he came to love the work he is given. There will be a pause, of course, as he looks into your eyes, searching for any trace of the wild you might still carry. There must have been a time when we did not need words, a way of reading the wind and the trail leading off through the tall grasses. Sometimes you want to peel back your skin, find the other one you were, before the mechanisms of desire became coded in your cells. Do you wonder how pain began? Not the grounding by wounds, but the other, deeper pain, sibling of loneliness that completes you. If you do not see how the doe grieves over her new fawn torn by coyotes in the early morning light, you are lost. If you cannot feel how we are all connected, we are lost. This much seems clear. If you are torn open by the certainty of having to leave this place you have come to love, you are alive enough. Being broken open is a gift, if you are willing. What else do you need to know? Thanks for listening.
That was Michael Moos. Anika Fajardo was born in Colombia, raised in Minnesota, and is the author of a book about that experience, Magical Realism for Non-Believers, a memoir of finding family. Her books for middle grade readers include the award-winning What If a Fish?, Meet Me Halfway, and the Disney tie-in novel Encanto, A Tale of Three Sisters. She lives with her family in Minneapolis, where she teaches at Augsburg University's MFA program. Anika Fajardo.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me. We just met recently at the book festival. And so he was kind enough to invite me, but even though he doesn't, my last name is Fajardo.
Fajardo.
That's what I said, isn't it?
It was close, but
It was close.
Oh.
It was a good Minnesota
I didn't
pronunciation.
say it. I didn't say it.
Believe it or not, I've had my name pronounced wrong before.
Yeah.
I am so pleased to be here in St. Paul. I live in Minneapolis, but my husband actually grew up not that far from here. In fact, I think he went to the elementary school over here. So I have been hawking my middle grade novel. It came out in September, and so I've been really concentrating on this, and it's really fun to come back to the memoir. It came out in 2019, and I did a lot of events in 2019, and then in February of 2020, I said, oh my gosh, I would just like to stay home for a little while. And I'm really sorry I said that to the universe. Basically everything I write about has to do with place and identity and family, whether I'm writing for adults or writing for children. I was born in Colombia. My parents got divorced when I was just under 2. My mom was from here and went down there for college, met a handsome man, and came back ready to get married at age 20. As many cross-cultural relationships don't work out, my parents did not. It was the 1970s, and there was, it looks like some of you might have known what was happening in the 70s. I gotta say that I have had, everyone who's read this book who is of my mom's generation has just, really identified closely, or, people know somebody like her, perhaps. And so my mom raised me in Minnesota as a single mom. I was an only child. I grew up with my mom and my maternal grandparents, and with no contact with my father. And I didn't meet him until I was 20, and I went down to Columbia for the first time in my memory, met him for the first time in my memory, all by myself, just kind of with that hubris of a college student that just kind of says, yeah, I'm just gonna go to another country and meet this stranger. And so much of this memoir is about that experience and sort of how place and the distance and this kind of cross-cultural experience, not just culture, but also families. So these families from different, I had this Colombian family that I hadn't known, was very close with my mom's family. And also a lot of identity, figuring out, I was half white, half Colombian, what does that mean? At a time when there wasn't really language around that either. So I'm going to read a chapter that I don't read all that often, actually. So this is kind of fun. The book starts at that first trip and then kind of goes through chronologically, and then it comes to, there's a big reveal in the middle. I won't spoil it, hopefully. And then it continues into my own becoming a mother. And has a little bit of back and forth in the timeline. So I am going to read this chapter. It's chapter 10, in case you wanted to know. It took me forever to find it. But the first time I went, my father felt this great need to show me everything. He and his wife, Ceci, her name is, felt this great need to show me everything about Colombia. And my father also treated me like a child. The last time he had seen me, I had been 2 years old, and he was the actually primary caregiver. My mom worked when I was a baby. And so he bought me a lot of candy and that kind of thing, which I did not appreciate as a 20-year-old. So this section, I got to escape with Ceci and one of her nieces. Ceci is quite a bit younger than my dad. He was a very good-looking man. So I think that's all you have to know. Oh, and you have to know about the Suzuki Jeep, which was an ancient Suzuki Jeep with absolutely no shocks whatsoever. No interior. It just sort of was open, and it was horrendous to ride in, but it was also sort of an exciting thing to be in this crazy Jeep, and we went everywhere with it. Chapter 10. My father talked and told me nothing. He showed me photographs and explained none of them. He embraced me, but somehow kept his distance. He wanted to keep me at arm's length and yet close. When Ceci wanted to take me and her niece, Maria Fernanda, to the hot springs at the Termales de Coconuco, he was reluctant to let me go. "We'll be back tonight," Ceci had cajoled, soothing him like a woman accustomed to the job. "Be careful," he said, as if he had the right to say that. I was relieved to get away from my moody father for the day. 3 days of travel to Cali with him had been exhausting, as was being his daughter, and the hot springs were as breathtaking as Ceci had promised they would be. The small natural pool, known as the Aguas Tibias, lukewarm water, was crystalline. Fed by a mountain hot spring, the water was blue, and the little pool was rimmed with the ferns and grasses of the mountainside. It was beautiful, and it was much colder than we had been led to believe. "Que frio," Maria Fernanda said, laughing with blue lips. "I'm freezing," I cried, my teeth chattering. "You don't want to go to the Aguas Hirviendas, do you?" Ceci asked, from where she stood, warm, fully clothed, and out of the water. Hirvienda means boiling. It sounded much better to me, and I nodded. "But that's where all the crowds are," she reminded us. Despite the prospect of crowds, Maria Fernanda and I were eager for somewhere warmer. It was late afternoon by now, and we were chilled and tired. "I have an idea," Ceci said, as she drove the Suzuki farther into the mountains to the Aguas Hirviendas, and the light began to fade from the sky. "Let's stay overnight here. The Coconuco Hotel is wonderful. We'll get a room, and then we can go to the Termales." I knew my father would not like this idea. He had been anxious at the prospect of letting me out of his sight for this trip up the mountain, as if he still saw me as a child who needed protection, watching. Something that I thought with sudden irritation he should have thought of a long time ago, long before I was a 21-year-old adult. "Let's do it," I said. By the time we settled into the hotel and changed back into damp bathing suits, it was dark. At the Termales de Coconuco, the natural aguas hirviendas that bubbled out from the earth boiled our skin raw and made sweat drip down our faces. Streetlights lie in the park and cast a bluish glow over the scene of revelers. We passed by tubs filled with couples soaking in the boiling water and skirted by the slides crawling with children still awake after the bedtimes. We tracked down 3 plastic cups and a bottle of rum and headed for the last pool, one that was empty of both tourists and water. Even though it was late in the evening, the pool was just filling with water pouring in through jets near what would eventually become the deep end. We descended a ladder to the pool's floor and splashed and kicked, holding our cups aloft to prevent spills. "Who wants another?" Ceci asked. She climbed the ladder and refilled the plastic cups with rum and coke, which waited for us at the pool's edge. Then back down she climbed, her rear end first in her floral one-piece. We sang songs, we danced, we teased, me and my half-American, half-Colombian, Spain-influenced Spanish. We were nighttime nymphs, wingless fairies, drunken sprites, and while we played like children in the bottom of that pool, I wondered how I ended up here. How did I end up in the middle of a war-torn South American country with 2 strangers dancing in my swimming suit at 10 o'clock on a January night? How do we end up anywhere? "Don't tell Renzo we gave you rum," Ceci cried, and Maria Fernanda collapsed into giggles. In Colombia, rum is pronounced ron, and that made me laugh all over again, pushing aside thoughts of this man, Renzo, my father. As the pool filled, I lay back in the water. I felt weightless, floating and looking up at the shadowing slopes and black skies above. The mountains of that region of the Andes rise to 10,000 feet and higher, and perhaps my breathing became shallow. The thin air combined with the ron made us all feel even more drunk. The next morning, Ceci took a meandering route back down the mountain, and at midday we stopped on the side of a road near a little stream. The mountainside was steep and grass-covered, like most of the landscape at this altitude. The most vertical slopes were shocking in their formation, so different from any kind of mountains I had seen before. Huge leaves provided shade, and jagged gray rocks jutted here and there as if meant for climbing and exploring. Thin clouds obscured the sun, and the air smelled like dust and rotting leaves. Ceci and Maria Fernanda pulled out the cokes and the bottle of rum again. I took my camera and walked along the roadway, taking pictures of the hillside and of a brown cow that grazed at a precarious incline. "Look at us," Maria Fernanda shouted. I looked up, and there they were. Ceci had rolled back the plastic and canvas cover of the Suzuki, and they were standing on the back seat of the car, grinning at me, their heads and shoulders and their hands holding the rum and cokes protruded from the open roof. "Say whiskey," I said, and snapped a picture, capturing that scene for myself to remember later. Near the Suzuki, we found a bridge by the stream, and I taught Maria Fernanda and Ceci to play a game called Pooh Sticks. I had learned about this game from Winnie the Pooh, read to me by my grandfather on snowy nights in Minnesota. Pooh Sticks is a very simple game. You lean over the bridge and drop a stick into the water, just a little one. You watch the moving water take hold of your twig and carry it away until it slips under the wooden boards of the bridge. "Quick," someone yells, and you all rush to the other side of the bridge. Lean over, way over, and watch for your stick to reappear. Sometimes it takes so long, you're sure you'll never see that little twig again. You're sure it's caught on something. It's swirling in an infinity of whirling water. And then suddenly, it bobs up again. You feel proud, even though you had nothing to do with its progress. Maria Fernanda and Ceci had never heard of Pooh Sticks, and whether it was the afternoon tragos of rum or the absurdity of the competition, these two Colombian women embraced it. There might have been guerrillas in those hills surrounding our game. Perhaps trucks carrying arms and drugs hurtled past the Suzuki, but if they did, we didn't notice. The three of us ran back and forth across a little bridge in the middle of the Colombian Andes, breathless with laughter. And just for a moment, I didn't wonder how I ended up here. I didn't wonder about all the things that didn't happen or all the things that did. I just dropped my little twig and laughed at the ridiculousness of the game, the idiocy, the wonderful pointlessness of it all. When we arrived home, red-cheeked with an empty bottle, my father exclaimed, "You let her drink rum." "Renzo querido," Ceci soothed, "she's a Colombiana." "You have to be careful," Renzo said, his words slurring from the bottle of something he had opened while we were gone. The alcohol made him even more emotional than usual, made him overcompensate for years of missed parenting. He was lonely, I saw, but I held my mouth in a straight line. And I saw something else in his face, a darkness in his eyes. The fact that I was 21 and fully adult, fully American, did not seem possible to him, I supposed. I had been absent, and now I had appeared again. A lifetime for me, a moment for him. "Anika, my dear," he said, reaching for me, putting his arm around my shoulder in a protective embrace. All he had left, I supposed, was to shield me from the harmless, from tragos of rum on a mountain road. That there were other things from which a parent might protect a child either did not occur to him or were too numerous to comprehend. Thank you.
That was Anika Fajardo. Right. I was going to ask. Unity Unitarian does not charge us for this lovely space, and they could. They charge everybody else. So we like to pass the basket. You know, one thing about a church, they got a lot of these baskets, and I know where to get it. I know the room. So if you're up for it, a few dollars for the cause, and we'll turn it over to Unity for their purposes. Kris Bigalk is a writer and professor based in Minneapolis. Her second collection of poetry, Enough, was released in the fall of 2019 from NYQ, that's New York Quarterly Books, and was a finalist in the 2020 Housatonic Book Award competition. Her first collection, Repeat the Flesh in Numbers, was released in 2012. Bigalk has published poetry in many literary magazines and anthologies, and also regularly publishes creative nonfiction and reviews. Kris founded and now directs the groundbreaking AFA in Creative Writing program at Normandale Community College. During the 2022-23 school year, Kris is assisting in the coordination of Write Like Us, an equity-based creative writing mentorship program serving 5 Twin Cities community colleges. Kris serves on the boards of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, AWP, Rain Taxi Review of Books, and the Lowry Hill East Neighborhood Association. She lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota with her family. My friend of 32 years, Kris Bigalk.
So, like Anika, I released my book in late 2019 and was saying the same thing in February. But and so this is my book Enough that came out that year. I am going to switch gears though. I'm going to read an essay that I recently wrote, and it's kind of seasonal, so I hope you enjoy it. Thanksgiving Eve. Thanksgiving Eve is not really a holiday. It's kind of the last possible moment before the serious cooking, baking, and prepping begins for the feast. I'm a church musician, specifically a soprano in the choir, and at my church, Thanksgiving Eve is a blowout celebration featuring every musical group: the preschool cherub choir, the 3 older children's choirs, a brass quartet, and the handbell choir. After the service, a pumpkin pie and coffee feast is served in the church basement, of course. I belonged to this church for 20 years, and for the first 18 of those years, the church was always packed for this service. It was one of the only services, other than Christmas and Easter, when the ushers didn't allow people to come in early and save seats, when extra seating was set up outside the main sanctuary for the latecomers who couldn't squeeze in. Honestly, I half dreaded the service. It didn't inspire a lot of gratitude in me to have to interrupt the last-minute house cleaning and other Thanksgiving Day preparations to ready the kids, get us all to church an hour and a half early for rehearsal, get the kids into their choir robes, get myself into my choir robe, and sit, sweating, in a church packed to the gills while the pastor stated the obvious. It was a season of thanks, and we should be thankful, yada, yada, yada. It probably wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that my mind was elsewhere during most of those services, calculating turkey cooking time or wondering if I had enough butter, except for the times when we sang. When I sing, I feel like I'm not in my own body. I feel the closest to God. Sorry, I need to switch my page here. My own singing career at church started very early. Though I did not sing for regular services, I was the entertainment du jour for bridal showers, baby showers, and other lady events at the church from the tender age of 3 or 4. With Mom accompanying me on the piano, I stood in front of the audience of ladies next to a Sunday school blackboard with the letters "Love" written out. I held a wooden pointer stick and tapped each letter as I sang. L is for the way you look at me. O is for the only one I see. V is very, very extraordinary. E is even more than anyone that you adore. You know it. You know it. Love was made for me and you is how that song ends. What I remember about those performances more than anything was my grandmother rushing up to me afterwards with a hug and a kiss, and then enjoying some sweets and punch with her, my mom, and the other women, watching the bride-to-be or mother-to-be glow under the wings of the church ladies, chattering and filling the hall with laughter. Church was a place where it was okay to shine a little if you were doing it for the benefit of all, a place where we celebrated each other, a place where you could feel love, where you could not just feel love, but talk about it openly. I just realized that I skipped a page. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think it'll work, actually. Maybe this will be another. All right. Woo. So I'm gonna go back to that line, when I sing, I feel like I'm not in my own body. I feel closest to God. Or if you prefer, a higher power. When the music flows through me. It seems like that to me, that it doesn't really originate inside of me, but somehow seeps in and comes out of my throat. While my faith has waxed and waned over the years, my love of singing has not. Truth be told, I'm just as comfortable in a church balcony as I am in my own home because my mom was the church organist. I spent most of my childhood Sundays in the balcony turning pages for her as she attacked the keyboard with both hands splayed, her legs dipping and gliding to the pedals to play the glorious deep bass tones underneath the dancing melodies. She was a magnificent organist, somehow relegated to this tiny rural church in southeastern Minnesota. At the time, I had no appreciation for the fact that she could have easily gotten a job playing in a larger city. It wasn't until I left home for college and heard other organists play that I realized her talents were rare and unusual. The church I grew up in, St. Matthew's Lutheran, was so small that until I was about 12 years old, there was no church choir at all. My dad provided most of the special music for services. He had a beautiful, deep baritone voice. As he had grown up attending the church, a built-in fan club of older ladies, mostly his mother's, my grandmother's friends, who fussed over him in the church hall after he sang, much to his discomfort. Every Christmas he sang, O Holy Night. Every Easter, Jerusalem. That was just tradition. Sometimes he would sing other songs with Mom's coaching, but he didn't read music and preferred to learn by ear. His nerves often got the best of him too. He only sang from the balcony and often stood far enough back so he couldn't see the ladies looking up at him with adoration, his hands shaking as he held the music. In 2020 and 2021, there was no Thanksgiving Eve at my service. Thanksgiving Eve service at my church. There were no services on Sundays or other holidays either. Church was broadcast on YouTube. Sometimes one of my sons would ask if we could watch it together, but instead of inspiring me, it just made me sad. To me, church was a place of community. It was hard to feel community in a passive experience like watching a service and reciting prayers and singing hymns in my living room. I missed hearing the voices of my choir mates in my ears, even the ones who sang off key. I missed having coffee with them, complaining about the hectic schedule with them. It turns out that faith, at least for me, is an ongoing conversation and was dependent on being in a room with living, breathing people. The biggest tragedy of the pandemic for me was that one of my favorite activities, singing, was one of the most dangerous. Just by moving air out of my lungs and across my vocal cords, if I was asymptomatic, I could spread a virus unknowingly to all of the vulnerable people in the choir. That very thing had happened in a church early in the pandemic and people had died. About 50% of our members were over the age of 55, and at the time before there were vaccines, we just couldn't risk exposing them. For a while, I sang alone at home, but eventually I just fell silent. When the choir came back and sang with masks on, there weren't many of us, and it was a depressing experience. I felt stifled, gagged. That magical feeling of the music moving through me couldn't happen when the air couldn't get out properly. This Thanksgiving Eve, for the first time in 2 years, I sat next to my choir friends, our masks off and robes on. We are all a little grayer and older looking, those of us who came back. But there's something else different about us too. Gratitude for the chance to be there at that service. I could see it on all of our faces, and in the extra large smiles, laughter, and hugs. Many of us have children the same age, kids who grew up singing in all of the choirs, many of whom are off at college, some are here in high school like my son, but who came home for the Thanksgiving Eve service. And for one of the anthems, they sang in front of the church, a line of 20 of our kids, voices merging and carrying over the heads of the congregants, swirling into joy. I squeezed the hand of one of my friends and whispered, "Who would have thought 20 years ago we'd be sitting here listening to our kids sound like this together?" And she squeezed my hand back. As I looked around the choir, I saw everyone just drinking in the experience we had all taken for granted so many years before. The joy of watching our kids take joy in being together, in making a joyful noise. A few minutes later, the kids joined us in the adult choir, and we all sang the choral benediction. We had come together to do one of the things we loved best, channeling the beautiful mystery of music through our bodies into the air, where it vibrated, mixed, and colored the air with fleeting yet persistent gratitude for the chance to be together. The final words of the anthem sung in imperfect unison, come home, you who are weary, come home." Thank you. I workshopped that with Dick and a few other friends that are here, and they said it was okay to So now I have the privilege of introducing Dick Terrill, who's, you already know, but I've prepared remarks.
Oh, no.
I first met Dick Terrill in the fall of 1991. I looked it up. When I enrolled in a creative nonfiction class he taught at Mankato State University. I was excited to take a class from this new professor who had won the AWP Prize for Creative Nonfiction and published his first memoir, Saturday Night in Baoding, about a year before. He followed that book with another book of creative nonfiction, Fake Book, which delves into his experience as a jazz musician, and has also authored several books of poetry, including What Falls Away Is Always, Almost Dark, and Coming Late to Rachmaninoff, winner of the 2004 Minnesota Book Award. He's been awarded fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, Wisconsin and Minnesota State Arts Boards, the Jerome Foundation, the MacDowell Colony, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, as well as 3 Fulbright fellowships. He is Professor Emeritus, is that how you say that? Okay. At Minnesota State Mankato, where he was Distinguished Faculty Scholar. Ever since that class at MSU in the early 1990s, I've read Dick's work with enthusiasm. Whether it was about subject I shared an interest in, such as jazz, film, or rural life, or about places and experiences foreign to me, Asia, revisiting an old family home, or trout fishing, an art I will never master. I am honored to have had him as a friend and a mentor all of these years, to have had the opportunity to see things through the lens of his curiosity, accuracy, and humor. What has always been evident in Dick's work is its excellence and its humanity. He relates information, impressions, events, and reflections on what it all means in a voice balanced between lyricality and practicality, with a wry sense of humor. His newest collection, Essentially, is yet another well-crafted, entertaining, thought-provoking book from a true master of the craft of creative nonfiction essays, Dick Terrill. As Brett Lotz says so eloquently in the blurb for the book, this is a ruminative book, this is a funny book, this is a musical book, this is a heartbreaking book. This is a book I love. Please join me in welcoming Dick Terrill.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for coming. Most of you are writers, and you know, when you put together something like this, the first thought is, no one's gonna come, you know? So, wow, everybody's here. That's great. I'm gonna read an essay, a short essay from Essentially, and then some excerpts from a longer essay. Most of the essays are too long to read in their entirety. And the essays are mostly about music, and the outdoors, which for me kind of morph into the same spiritual thing, and probably true for others as well. And then there's also a sort of an overlying or underlying subject matter of aging. Here's the first essay in the book. It's called Solstice. Life used to be fun, my mother says a few days before her 89th birthday. Now it's shit. It's hard to argue with her. Her memory is such that she asks me questions, and by the time I answer, she's forgotten what she's asked. Our conversations take on an Abbott and Costello circularity. Suddenly disagreeable, she starts every sentence with but. She no longer remembers my father, 20 years gone, and calls me by my brother's name. You just have to get out of bed and start your routine, I tell her. It's a lame proposition, I know. Why, she asks. Her contradictions, out of character for the person she used to be, are now the most rational feature of her discourse. I just want to be somewhere where I can help someone, she says. She will never help anyone again, not even herself. I'm trying to be a person. I walk her down to the lunchroom of the nursing home and sit with her next to her roommate, what's her name? 6 months older than my mother, roommate Mabel has a broken knee that now will never heal, and a mind as cloudless as a mid-June day. When we got the farm, I cleared 60 acres of rocks, Mabel tells me. 60 acres, but I loved it. This, Mabel adds, it's a hell of a life. but as long as I have my wits about me, I'll get by. I know that Mabel is referring to my mom, and I'm thinking Mabel needs someone to point to who's worse off than she is. Maybe we all need that. After lunch, I leave the nursing home and drive for the woods. I've forgotten my fishing gear back in the city, but on Audi Lake, I paddle my kayak on a day that's a poster for Wisconsin in early summer. Wild irises are in bloom wherever sun hits the shoreline. Water lilies, the lake with many bays and inlets I can explore. There are no cottages, there is no development to mar the shore. There are 2 skiffs fishing, some kids' laughter from a campsite out of view, a mother bald eagle tending her nest on a dead tree, wary of my little boat. Otherwise, only me. I drink 2 cans of beer in the sun and get delightfully toasted. I'm happy to forget who I am. 1 week before solstice, that midpoint. It will be the longest day, but the hottest weather comes in July. I load my kayak atop my car for the drive home. There in the sand of the parking lot is a painted turtle, just more than the size of my hand. She doesn't move, though I could touch her with my paddle. I could kill her. Except I love turtles, love all creatures of the lake and the shore. What is she doing here, seeing me, yet not moving away? Is she lazy, like me, avoiding something, enjoying something else? No, she's laying eggs. On this one day when something in the water or the air or herself tells her it's time. She makes a kicking motion to cover the hole she's dug, then ambles off. Her shell, pieces of a puzzle, black lined by orange, flash of orange from her underside. A yellow line along each cheek. Her legs, ancient skin, sinuous. She can smell the lake and knows which way to go. She's crawling through a parking lot, so I step behind her to quicken her pace. I follow her all the way back to the water, which she crawls into the way someone tired might crawl into bed. She is beautiful to me. There is no way those eggs will ever hatch, ever bring forth life. Heading out of the woods and on my way home too, 6 more times I stop my car, hurry turtles out of the sand, in the middle of the gravel road, before they're run over by some driver who doesn't care. This next essay is called On Hearing, On Listening, and it's one of those fragmented essays, so it's easy to pick out 3 or 4 excerpts, and it still makes some sense. Or if you prefer, think of it as prose poems, if that helps. Let's see, what was I going to say? Like a lot of musicians, I have a mild to moderate hearing loss, and that's in here, but I'm not going to read those parts because that's just plot. That's just backstory. I'll read the more fun parts instead. And I refer in this first section to a band. I just want you to know that's not the band that Larry and I play in. It's a different band. And by the way, we'll be at KJ's Hideaway Saturday, the old Artist Quarter, doing our Bill Evans show. So stop by. On hearing, on listening. At 65, I'm usually the youngest in the band. We play the oldest of old standards, very little from after the war, plus novelty tunes, blues. The most senior player is a trumpeter who, even if you ask him, won't give his age. I don't ask. The trumpet is a very physical instrument, and Stan confessed to me once that he never practiced. The band leader introduces him as having that fat New Orleans sound, which I thought is likely a result of him being as old as he is and never practicing on the most unforgiving of horns. It all depends on what you mean by fat. Stan is a sweet man. Stan is also a good musician. He seldom looks at a chart, always offers me his chart if the leader calls a tune I don't know. Stan doesn't need to look at the music. Stan can hear everything. Except Stan can no longer hear very well. In our pleasant conversations on breaks, I can see Stan's eyes reading my lips. Sometimes his responses to me are non sequiturs that seem to change the subject. We're talking about a player he likes, then we're talking about a good movie he just saw. He wears a hearing aid in each ear, but these little machines are notoriously ineffective when the background noise is as thick as it usually is in a lively bar when the band is on break. Most of the time, Stan does fine. And when Stan hits the right notes, the bluest notes, the audience loves him. Like most audiences, of course, they listen with their eyes. Their eyes hear only this round and sweet man of indeterminate age, seated behind his trumpet as if it's an extra, somewhat awkward appendage. They can see he's having a good time, and thus so are they. Miss, what's the special tonight? One time on a simple blues, Stan is playing his solo, the bell of the horn in the air, angled over his unneeded music stand, as if he's emptying the last of a sweet liquid into his mouth. He has that fat sound. The notes splotch and settle on pitch. Problem is, those right notes fall clearly into a key other than the one in which the rest of the band is playing. The bass player who, like Stan, has an ear that I admire, looks puzzled for a bar or two, then catches my eye and we both smile. Now the guitar player hears it, and the singer. Stan plays on. Every note a good note, a right note, if only the rest of the band were wrong. Then after Stan's chorus, the singer comes in, spot on in the key we thought we'd all agreed to. I know Stan always listened. What I'll go to my grave dying to know is, when Stan played that chorus in the wrong key, what did the rest of the band sound like to him? What did he sound like to himself? And what did the two have in common? What notes did they share? Beethoven was near the end of his life, but still doing what he could to keep people from knowing about his deafness, which by this point was profound. He was conducting an orchestra in rehearsal of one of his works. Let's say it was the Ninth Symphony, since that makes the best story. In this story, Beethoven, knowing his score by heart, conducted with his eyes closed. Or perhaps he'd just finished writing the movement the orchestra was rehearsing, and his eyes were buried in the score. Choose the detail you like best. It was all a long time ago. Then, for some reason, the orchestra in chorus, was it the last movement of the Ninth Symphony? Were there singers present too? They all stopped at once. Perhaps the manager of the theater walked in, waving his hands to announce what time the green room would be available before next weekend's opening night. Did 19th century Vienna concert halls have green rooms? If so, were the green rooms green? Or maybe the concert hall was very old and heavy snow had fallen over Vienna all that winter. And now finally the roof began to leak, and pieces of plaster from the ceiling were dropping like light rain over the music stands of the second violins. Stop! What happened next, though, was that the eyes of the orchestra's players rose up from their parts to the figure of Beethoven, who continued to conduct with as much passion, as much vigor as he'd had the moment before. His shock of hair, unkempt now, thrown from side to side, a half second behind the beat. The great eyes indeed closed, as if alive in death, as if dying, but still in this life. He listened through his dark silence, and for him the music went on, glorious and undiminished. As a college freshman, I had to get up 5 mornings a week and trudge through campus and over a river to make it to music theory class at 8 a.m. Not easy. The teacher seemed impossibly old to us, even older than I am now, it occurs to me as I write. But everyone liked and respected him, so we made it to class. In fact, upon his retirement, the music department named the concert hall after him. During Wisconsin winters, this trek was especially foreboding. Those mornings below zero, when crossing the bridge over the Chippewa River, you could swear you were hearing cold. Some combination of ice sheets cracking and popping over the moving water below, and the indefinite pitch of boots taking their paces on the snow-covered walkway. But even on the coldest winter evenings after the workday, we would see Professor Gantner, the old music theoretician, walking home wearing only a tweed sport coat and wool scarf. Word was he was part Eskimo, but even then I didn't believe it. One morning in class, something happened that caught my attention, woke me up. Mr. Gantner was talking about dissonance, the sound of a chord that grates at the ear, a sound that sets out to displease or provoke. Now, he said, seated at the piano, ideas of what dissonance is change over time. The music doesn't change, the listeners change. Okay, so what, thought the 18-year-old minds in the room. Take, for instance, this chord. Then he played to what all of us students was a perfectly interesting and beautiful arrangement of notes. To my ear, that's harsh. He made a slightly unpleasant face, which I imagine was hard for him. Can you hear it? Ooh! He pounded the chord harder repeatedly. Then his face grew calm. But I know to you young people, it sounds perfectly fine. He was right again. It's entirely too romantic, entirely too good of a story for me to contend, as I'd like to, that moment may be the first time I truly listened that carefully. I could hear the chord as pleasant, and I thought I could hear it the way he did too. This is the last section of this essay. My dog Zachy is partly deaf like me. He's 14, which is 72 in Bashan years, a website tells me. We're the oldest of buddies, and our lives run in pleasing parallels, if at a slower pace than 10 years before. It was maybe 5 years ago that I was hurrying my drive home from work because I knew a cut from my band's new CD was going to be spun on the local jazz station. When I came in the door, Zachy was excited to see me, and not aware the reason for my haste was something other than being anxious to see him. I petted him quickly and sat back in a chair next to the radio in the dining room. Zachy jumped in my lap and settled in for a nap with his head on my thigh, content. The jazz station was in the middle of a public service announcement, yada, yada, yada. I didn't know what cut from our CD they'd play, but then it started. We did Night and Day by Cole Porter with a Latin beat. I started with an unaccompanied melody on tenor sax. Those first notes, 2 ace and a dotted half on concert G. Night and day, and then You Are the One. Zachy is a companion dog, and chief among the pursuits of his day are eating, sleeping, and seeing what I'm up to in various parts of the house. He will venture down to my basement practice studio, nudge open the door with his little nose, and see and hear me making that sound on the big yellow saxophone. It must seem very loud to him, and I suppose rather pointless. He may be right about the pointless part. So when he's sure I'm not up to anything important, he will about-face and scoot up the stairs. But that's backstory. In this moment I'm telling you about, I'm in the antique dining room chair, beer opened, shoes off, dog in my lap. The DJ cues us up and talks us in. Those first 3 notes, night and day. And then the little miracle. Zachy's head pops up right from his deep repose. His posture at the ready, his attention wrapped around the moving elements, that concert G on the tenor saxophone. He recognized it. He knew the sound of his master's voice coming through that golden tube, that useless contraption with a conical bore, producing that music we all are made of. Loving me as a good dog must, he couldn't help but listen. The tones were packed away in the part of the brain reserved for familiar sound. And in the next moment or two, I knew they would always be there, without regard to dynamics or tone color, volume or pitch. The ineffable, internalized sound of coming home, or the sound of waiting, maybe not so patiently, of knowing everything, any time of night or day, would be just all right. knowing without sound, without saying or being told, you are the one. Thank you. This was so much fun, the whole evening. The music, the other readers. How about a round of applause for my other guests and readers tonight? Larry McDonough, Kris Bigalk, Anika Fajardo, and Michael Moos. We'd be delighted to sign books. Some are over here and the rest will be over here shortly, after which I'd be ready for a beer. If anybody's up for Sweeney's is right around the corner. We used to go all the time, but whatever, if you want. So there's that to consider. Next month's reading, January 12th, right here. The 4 readers will be Ted Bowman, Dobie Gibson, Catherine Savage, and Miriam Weinstein. So hope to see you then, and thank you so much for coming.